Everybody ready? Everybody ready? All right, before I introduce our guest speaker today, I wanted to thank a couple people. Yang, thank you very much, wherever you are, for doing the slow roast.
Yay!
Thank you very much. Slow roast biscuit. I want to also thank our board members, fellow board president Bill Tennant.
Thank you for coming, gentlemen, ladies.
Bob Weaver, treasurer, long time. Tim Daniels, Steve Carlson, James Clausen,
Secretary.
Tom Bacon. Ken Greenberg couldn't make it here today. I'm Wes Whitaker. But all right, so special guest speaker. James Wright is a hand tool specialist, YouTube, even what I would call celebrity YouTube videographer. I think he's done something like 1,600 videos on actually using different hand tools. He's been kind enough to fly in from the Midwest, come down, and we've got a great subject today. So Stanley Scrapers, sort of their history, evolution, specialties, all that sort of stuff. So anyways, thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you. I'm James Wright. First off, let me tell you a little bit about myself. Number one, I am not a fine woodworker. I am not a historical woodworker. I am not a professional woodworker. I'm a guy in my shop having fun. It's the way I like to present it, is I don't want to make the best woodworking I can make. I don't want to make things the way they were made 100 years ago. I want to make things the way that I want to make them. I want to have fun with it and experiment and play around and mess up and learn from it and just have a good time in the shop. I think a lot of woodworking has gone to making perfection and chasing after that goal. And I want to say, no, just stop. We're making curls today. We're going to have some fun. And so a lot of my point of view is a little different than that. And I do things in slightly different, odd ways. And so my background's a little bit different. So if you hear something like that, take it with a grain of salt. The one thing I like to say is there is no right way to do woodworking. There are some wrong ways, but there is no right way, nor is there the best way. There's the way that works for you and you enjoy and it fits your system. So that's a little bit about my background and what I do. But this is a little bit of a different subject for me. Most of the time when I'm teaching how to make dovetails or how to do a particular joint or making some odd project. And scrapers is something that has always fascinated me because it is such a simple tool. You just have a rectangular card of steel with a little burr turned on it, and it can do all the woodworking you want. And it is a fascinating tool. But in such a simple tool, there are so many different styles and designs and ways to hold it and different ways to turn a burr that it can do all sorts of crazy things. So one of the interesting things is you can get a simple, and I have to say, I'm sorry, I had a cold 5 weeks ago, and I still have a cough that I can't get rid of. So, yeah.
Don't tell him.
Now I gotta remember what I was saying. The card scraper is such a simple tool. It can work and function with a perfect 90-degree corner. And it actually compresses the wood and actually causes it to bounce up and remove itself from the surface below. It's really kind of cool under a microscope, and if I had a microscope and a projector, I would love to show you that, but I couldn't take all of that with me on the airplane, so I'm sorry, you've got to kind of imagine it. But in general, most of the ways that a card scraper works is actually just like a plane. There is an edge that comes out that cuts into the work, but that edge is a tiny little curl on the very corner of the blade. And so what happens is as the shaving hits that edge, it gets severed, sheared, and then immediately runs into the plate and bounces out. And that actually compresses or breaks the curl in front of it. So this allows you to do planing work against the grain, across the grain, on difficult grain. And whenever you're working with something where the grains are going in multiple directions or it's figured in some way or another, it's amazing what you can do with just a simple card scraper. And the great thing about this is that most of the time, well, there's a bunch of different styles. What you do is you take the card and you actually flex it a little bit. You put a curvature into it, so when you're putting contact in, you're not using the full width of the card, you're just using a small section of it that's actually coming in contact. And so because of that, it's actually creating a dish in the work, small enough that you're never going to be able to feel it, you're never going to be able to see it, but you can hit that tiny little spot of tear out, and you can clean up that little bit with a card scraper. So whenever you're coming in and cleaning out those little spots, rather than taking the entire surface down a notch more, you can just hit that tiny bit of tear out with a card scraper. And if you've ever hated dust in your shop, this is the answer. A card scraper can remove an immense amount of sanding. Now, it doesn't mean sanding isn't traditional. They had sanding back in the 1500s. They would take paper, cloth, linen, put on high glue, put sand into it, and they would sand with it. It was something that would wear out much quicker, and so it wasn't something that would be used as much. It would be that last resort and something odd. But for most cases, a card scraper can do all of your sanding work. The problem with it is when you're flexing it, you're putting force into the work, and that tiny little cutting action right on the corner of that creates a lot of heat. And this card heats up really, really quickly. And if you're doing it right and you're going at it, in 30 seconds to a minute, the card gets so hot you can't hold on to it. And so the answer to that is you flip the card over and you start working on another spot because it's a little cooler here. And then you flip it back over and it's still a little warm there. And then you flip it over to this side and then it's hard to hold on to. And so you're kind of playing with it, and eventually your hands get tired and your thumbs get worn out, and it's just not great. But it does the work. And so if you're just needing a small spot of cleanup, this works phenomenally. The next step to it is, what would happen if I made a jig that did that? It's something that pulls back the two sides and a screw that comes in the middle to put a little curvature into it, so that now my hand isn't in contact with that. I'm holding onto a block that's actually bending it for me. And in that case, I can go at it a long time because I'm not touching this, so I'm not having to burn my thumbs on it. But the problem with that is because it's bent and held in place, I can only use this one corner. Whereas the great thing with the card scraper is I can use this corner and I can flip it around and then I can use this corner and I can flip it over and I can use this corner and flip it over this way, use that corner. And then I just did the middle section, and so I can slide over to the side and I can use this side and flip. I can get 16, 17 different sections out of this before I have to take it back and resharpen it. Whereas if I put it in a holder, I'm only using that one section, and then I have to reposition the holder, and it takes time to do that. So the holder has its benefits, but it also has its drawbacks. And that's the way it was for a long time. You also see some of the early cabinet scrapers are just a simple block of wood that will hold this at an angle, and we'd either have handles out to the side or a handle front and back, and whatever the maker particularly liked. But the nice thing about a cabinet scraper is they didn't necessarily put a flex into the plate. They would use the full width of the plate. So you would have a solid piece that would engage the entire plate, and you would get a shaving across the whole width. That's why it wouldn't be a full width shaving this way, because taking off 5-6 inches of material, it would be a lot of force and very, very hard to push. But if you turn it this way and you're only taking off 2 to 3 inches, it works great. And if someone wanted that, you know what they would do? They would make it, because they work with wood. All they need is a screw to put it in there and clamp it down. And any woodworker can make a jig to hold this in place, make a cabinet scraper to hold this in place. And that worked great for hundreds of years. But along came the mid-1800s, and the Industrial Revolution started kicking off, and people started making things, and people got to the point where they wanted to buy things rather than make them. Because if I'm making my money making furniture, if I'm making the jig to hold this, I'm not making money at that time. And so it became an efficiency sake. And in most of the world, it didn't take off that fast. And it didn't really take off until like the 1900s. But in the US, we had something called the Civil War. And in the Civil War, hundreds of thousands of men were killed, taken out of the marketplace. And those who were still around had to make up. and became incredibly industrious in finding ways to make different things come about. And you see this absolute explosion of patents right after the Civil War. So many things came on the market and were tried in different ways. And it was 1867, Stanley came out with their set of bench planes and changed woodworking forever. And everyone from that point on was then mimicking what Stanley did. Soon after that, they realized people like these things, people like a scraper to hold it. What would happen if we made one? And the one big downside to making a cabinet scraper, the way it would normally have been done, is that whatever would hold this would hold it at that angle that I've made it at, which is okay as long as you're always turning your burr at that angle. If one time you turn your burr a little bit more, well, now your cabinet scraper isn't going to work quite as well. It's going to take a heavier shaving, or it's going to take a lighter shaving. And the only way you can turn it is to grind that, or sand that, sharpen that burr off and create a new one. So Stanley said, what if we just made that adjustable? And they released the number 12. And yes, it came in order, so they had the 1 through 8, and then the 12, the 9, 10, 11, and then the 12 came out. And this came out in, what was the date? 1885. And the cool thing about this is now we have adjustable screws, so I can change the angle of the bed on here. So if my burr is off a little bit and I'm taking a little heavy shaving, all I have to do is move the screws and adjust the angle to whatever the shaving is. One of the problems I have with teaching card scraping isn't always how do you turn the burr, how do you sharpen it? And a lot of people have problems with how do I sharpen and turn the burr. Most of the time that I've found, it's actually not a problem with how they sharpen the burr, it's a problem with how they hold the card scraper. Because if your burr is at this angle and you're using it way down here, you're not going to get what you want. And getting the card scraper at the right angle when you're using it is often the hardest part of getting the card scraper to work right. And so just as a side note, when I'm teaching how to use it, you start with the card perfectly vertical, you bend it and you use it perfectly vertical and it's not catching anything. You slowly lean it forward until it catches. And at that point, you lock everything in place, and that's the angle you want to use it at. Whereas a lot of people will go farther or bring it back and wonder why it's not working because it's at the wrong angle. And Stanley said, hey, we can fix that. And this is one of the things Stanley is great at, is they made lots of adjustable things. And so they called this the adjustable veneer scraper. And that Stanley's naming, I actually find to be a really fascinating subject for me, because they are very specific about the words they use when they actually name the tools. So most of the time, if you talk to someone about a jig that holds a card scraper, they call it a cabinet scraper. And that's because a cabinet maker would use it. But it doesn't always tell when they would use it. Whereas Stanley called this a veneer scraper, specifically not to the cabinetry trade, but the specific in the cabinetry trade as a veneer scraping. Because if you're doing veneer or marquetry, a lot of times the grain in the marquetry is going different directions. You need to have something you can dial in. And having this adjustable allows you to adjust exactly the angle at which you are cutting with your card scraper. It allows you to dial in so that you're not going to be tearing out the veneer you just put on your work. And so this gives you all of that adjustability that was really hard to do with a shop-made wooden. And these actually sold pretty well. Not as well as the bench planes, but it was something, was a specialty. If you didn't do veneer work, you didn't need one of these. But Stanley got really, really good at all the little specialties. And I find it interesting that we tend to think of the Stanley number 80 cabinet scraper as the quintessential cabinet scraper. When people think about that, this is the form factor they think about. But Stanley didn't make this for a long time. This was the first one they came out with, and the reason being is it was adjustable. The other interesting thing about this is that it used the method of not flexing the plate. It cut the full width of the shaving. It was a flat edge. Some people would actually grind a little camber into the edge so it would cut in the middle. but it was designed to have a straight edge to cut the full width. And putting the handles on both sides allowed you to put your whole weight into it and actually go through it. So you could do a larger, wider section. But that took more force. And if you know anything about people, we want to find things easier. We want to find things a little simpler. And Stanley said, well, if 3 inches is too big, what if we make it smaller? And so Stanley started making additions to the planes and changing them a little bit. And rather than discontinuing this one, they sold this one. And then they made them with a wooden bottom because a lot of people didn't like the metal on the wood. So you could get them with a rosewood bottom. And you can get them in different sizes. And then they said, well, what if we went and changed out the blade we could get in it? And so you could actually order them with different thickness blades. You could order them with, these ones are actually toothing blades. So if you wanted to use them like a toothing plane, you could buy the specialty blade. Stanley got very, very good at making things very specific, and they would actually name them a lot of times with the specific use in mind, not just a broad category, but this is for Tuesdays with cross-grain wood and oak. And a lot of their advertisements, they would actually go into very, very specific instances of this is where it would be used. Stanley advertisings are fascinating to read. Now, let me see where I'm at. So the one downside to this is that's expensive. When it first came out, what was the price? I had that listed here. Oh, yeah. Well, it was originally $6.50.
So today's dollars?
That would be somewhere around like $700. And they sold quite a few of them because it did the job well. And if you were doing veneer work, something that was adjustable, making this jig yourself would have been very time consuming. And $700 in capable money, that's a worthwhile tool if it does the job well. But if you look at it, I mean, it's got 2 different nuts here. It's got a specialty rod that ends in a pin. It's got this thumb nut over here. It's got like 4 different cast pieces. It's got this handle that has to be turned and shaped into it. There's a lot that goes into making this, and it makes it very expensive. Now, the other interesting thing about Stanley is we think about inflation over time, prices slowly go up. This was originally sold for $650, and it was in 1870. Yeah, 1870, it first came out for $650. By 1879, the price had come down to $350 for the exact same tool. Because they were selling enough of it they could mass produce it, all of those specialty items became quicker and easier to produce. They spent less time in it. They could sell it for less. And rather than Stanley trying to pocket the money, they realized that they could sell more of them if they could drop the price and keep it competitive. And that was one of the things that kept Stanley ahead of all the other manufacturers. They had a large enough base that they could keep dropping their prices. So if you wanted to come onto the market and make this, you had to start at the $650 range. And if you can see someone else who has one for $650 and Stanley's selling it for $350, there's no competition there. But it's still expensive. It's still complicated. And that's why Stanley came out with the 80. And this thing is dirt simple. It's 1 casting, it's 3 screws, and it's a bar. And if every now and then you'll find this bar is actually made from scrap rulers. You'll actually see the ruler markings on there. Because they were so cheap, they went, no, we got some scrap over here that didn't make the cut. We'll just go slice those up and put some holes in it and make them for these. And these were dirt cheap. What was the price on the 80? 65 cents.
And what year was that, James?
The 80 came out in, a bit horrible number, 1898.
Wow.
65 cents. Or you could buy them by the dozen for 50 cents a piece. You see why then this became such a ubiquitous thing and why there are so many of these on the market. Because if you needed a cabinet scraper, you see this for $350, like $400 in this range, you can go buy one of these for about $80. And that's a phenomenal deal. And that's why today, even you go and buy modern ones, They're cast identically to this. You go by the Kuhns, it's the exact same thing. And it's so simple and so basic that you really can't mess it up. There's nothing that can go wrong on this. As long as there's a flat surface, it works out really well. And that took over the market. But surprisingly, Stanley kept selling these. And you would think if this came out so cheap that this would disappear. No, they even started coming out with these ones. And they made several modifications and other changes that came out after the 80 because of the adjustability on this. That adjustability allowed you to focus in on really delicate woods, veneers. And that's where this really started to shine. And because it cut full width, you could put in the toothing planes. So when you're doing veneers and you need to rough up the back of your veneer and your surface, you use the toothing plane. Then you pop this out after the glue on, you put in your straight blade, and you clean off and you smooth the surface. It's one tool with different blades that can do the whole thing and do it really well and carefully so you're not going to be tearing up and ripping apart your veneer. And it's all because of that adjustability. Without that, you're really dialing into what angle you put on your burr. And that's the one downside to the 80 is it's at that angle. I'd love to find out what that angle is. It looks like about 80. It would be interesting to find out if a 80 had an 80-degree angle. So yeah, that's one I find kind of interesting because nowadays, finding an adjustable cabinet scraper is something that's hard to find. It's not something that we think about as much because these have become so ubiquitous and so common that in the antique market, I mean, you find these everywhere. So if you're wanting to go into the shop and do cabinet scraping, you grab one of those. Could you make sure I'm on the right track here?
Hey, James,
Yes?
do you know if when they first came out with the 80, if it had the screw that puts a little camber on your blade?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. So you have two screws on this side that sandwich the scraper up against the body, and then you have one on this side that cranks it down and actually puts a camber into it, just like your thumbs would do when cutting it. So this doesn't cut full width; it only cuts the angle of how much you want to put into it. And that thumb on the back is actually how you adjust how deep a cut you want. You turn it in more, it puts more of a camber, it cuts deeper. You back it off less, and you do a little bit lighter shaving. Which, I mean, it's incredibly easy to set up. Actually, when you do set it up, it goes on too tight. Yep. Yeah, I probably use pliers in this. What's that?
Probably should.
Yeah. When you set it up, you actually put it on a flat surface. You put the card in and just let it rest on the work, and you tighten down these two, and it shouldn't take any shaving at all. And then with a slight turn on the back, that slight turn will put a little bit of camber in, which engages the blade a little bit, and then you can put more and more until you get it where you want it. And so it's really easy to set up as long as you have a flat surface to put it on and put the card in, which is why I love teaching beginners how to use these because they're dirt simple. There's almost no way to go wrong with them. The other thing that really trips people up is the blade's angle this way, so everyone's thinking you push it in this direction, right? No, this is the front, this is the back, it goes in that direction. Card scrapers always lean forward. Then Stanley does what they do, and they made things special. The 80 is nice, it was cheap, it was affordable, anyone could buy one of these, but it was cheap. And not everyone likes cheap. Some people want things to be a little bit more pizzazz. So they said, you know what we can do? We can do the 81. And the 81 is basically the same thing, except for rather than being the thumb screw in the back, it again goes back to the flat straight blade and puts on a rosewood sole. So now you get the rosewood on the work. And steel on wood does perfectly fine. But wood on wood just feels good. It runs smoothly, and especially when the tool's working, it's very pleasing to use. And we think about this as a new thing about, the the tool being nice, the tool being fit and finish, making it pleasing, that's something that's useful to us, but wouldn't be useful to the people back in the days who were making a living on it and they were just producing things. No, they liked it too. You talk about, read some of the writings from back in the time, singing the praises of wood curls. It was still an everyday, regular occurrence, but it was still a pleasing, rewarding thing to see.
What year did the 81 come out?
The 81 came out in 1909. So it was still something that was pleasing and rewarding and enjoyable. And so Stanley liked to make things that were pleasing and rewarding. They had a nice fit and finish. They had extra chrome on it. They weren't just japanned. There was extra things that went into it to make it so when you held it, you felt like you were holding something amazing. You felt like you were holding something that was special. And Stanley did that in quite a bit. They would often sell out two things side by side. Like the 42, it was the 41 and the 42, came in cast iron or gunmetal, bronze, brass, or was it? Bronze. It's bronze. And honestly, is there any functional difference between the two? If you drop the bronze, it's probably going to last better. But in reality, no, but the bronze looks better, it feels better, and that's why Stanley sold more of them, even though it cost more. Let's see, the next thing is, for a long time we had the cabinet scraper was a form factor similar to this. Usually the wings would come out on either side so that you could grab it, you can put your weight into it, and you can push away from you. Or you could pull it towards you, though it just never caught right, would never bounce right. They were generally for pushing away from you. Stanley then said, well, what if you wanted to pull it towards you? So in this case, you can put one hand here, and you can pull it back. And because it's so simple like this, it's adjustable, so that now we can do more of that. We tend to think of these as paint scrapers or glue scrapers, but a cabinet worker would also use one of these. The interesting thing is Stanley then called this a scraper. It didn't put any interesting moniker or anything specific to it. This was a scraper. This was a cabinet scraper. This was a veneer scraper. So this was something that was kind of a general use tool. Most commonly, you would think about it for stripping paint off of houses and things of that nature, because you can use this at any angle in any way you want. Whereas with a cabinet scraper, it's this. You're not going to do that with it. So if you're working on a wall or an odd surface, you need something that your body can work in any direction, any orientation. This is actually the Type 1, which you can see that has this odd little bow out in the middle that gives a spring to it, so when you tighten down the nut on it, it can clamp down on it. The Type 2 and on then was shaped, how do you do it there? A little bit differently. So kind of an interesting thing there. They also introduced these disposable blades. Now these you could sharpen, you can turn burrs on them, you can reuse them, but they actually sold them as easily replaceable blades. And so you could buy packs of blades to go into them. Not that you would replace it every time you used it. You would sharpen it quite a few times, but then you would replace it much faster. Whereas with the blade on this one, it's a straight blade, and so you just keep grinding it back as you go and remove more material, and it would last longer. But I don't know why people like disposable things. So some of the other interesting things that Stanley came out, there were basically most things fit into that category of a veneer scraper, a cabinet scraper, or a standard scraper. But there were several other caveats. We like the feeling of a bench plane. Running along the bench, standing at a bench, it's something that your body gets used to. It's something that any woodworker has a natural muscle memory to it. The problem is with a cabinet scraper, rather than going this way, you're now pushing straight away from you. So Stanley said, well, they weren't the first to, but what if we put a plane on it? And they came out with the 112 as opposed to just the 12. And the 112 is a plane, works the exact same, has the exact same adjustable mechanism, so you can still do all the veneer work on here, except for you push across yourself as opposed from away from yourself. And honestly, I personally love using one of these. It feels really good to me just because my body mechanics have gotten used to it. And the first time I played with it, I found that kind of mentally interesting in that these two do the exact same thing. They're the exact same blade, the exact same mechanism. Why would one be any different than the other, but other than the fact that my body knows this movement and I don't use this movement quite as much. But Stanley didn't sell as many of these, and so because of that, there are a few of them on the market, and therefore, they cost more. But along that same vein, the one thing that people would complain about, especially with the blades that would be straight across, is that they would take more force to get into. So like with regular bench planes, you make them narrower, it takes less force to push them. So Stanley said, well, what if we make it even smaller? We have block planes. What would happen if we took a block plane and mixed it with that? And they came out with the 202. Now this is the Stanley #1 of the scraper world. And in most cases, these cost more than Stanley #1s. And honestly, much like the Stanley #1, they were kind of revered as the one thing that it's really cool, it's nice, it's neat, but there aren't very many great uses for it. And so Stanley didn't sell that many of them, and therefore they're more expensive now. But it's a cute little plane. There have been several remakes of these, just like with the #1. I actually have one here from, oh, come on, what's the name? No, Hamler. This one's made Hamler, Phil Hamler? Paul Hamler, there's a P. Yeah. Well, he only made a few of these. And so there have been multiple redos of these that, and you talk to people who like them and use them, and why do you like it and use it? Well, it does this one job really well. But mostly it's because it makes me happy. And that's a lot of the way it is with the 212, is that it's...
What year were those made?
What's that?
These small ones, what year did they come out?
1920s,
1930s?
No, this was 1911.
1911.
Mm-hmm. So again, it's one of those things that we as humans like little things, and we're willing to spend more, and that's nothing new. That was the same back in the day. People like cute little things. They like things that make them happy.
So what's the value on that if you were to buy one at a used store?
This one right here is probably about $2,600.
Really? Wow.
Because it's in really nice shape. This one doesn't belong to me. This one is on loan from a friend. If you know Steve McNulty, let's see, both of the 202s, the other Hamler, the 282s, and then the 112. Those are his. He has a really cool display in a shop. He has a shop in northern Wisconsin dedicated to hand tools, but he has a whole display of every single Stanley scraper that was ever made. And it's absolutely gorgeous.
Kind of like the one over there?
Yeah, but just Stanley. Yeah, so...
Beautiful collection over there.
Yeah, where James, where are you at?
He's over there. Straight ahead. There he is.
Oh, back over there. Yeah, I'm like, oh, I've got some great scrapers I'll bring in here. I'll borrow them from and show up and what's over there? Like, great, thanks a lot.
The First Tool Club. We've got some heavy-duty collectors here.
Yeah, definitely.
This is wonderful.
He's finding that out.
No, the information out here is phenomenal. The questions, I love walking up to tables and saying, what is that? And great stories, so thank you all. Oh, yeah, Stanley also sold the, what was the number on this one? It's the weird one. 283. And this one I find very interesting because they were trying to find ways to make this a little cheaper, but also add a few other things, and having the handle actually on the card scraper, I want to know why. And I'm sure that there's some reason why, and I don't know if it's price or the method of making it, or I don't know. But I've always found this one to be really fascinating, and I want to find out more about it. So if anyone has any information about why they would put the handle on the blade itself, I would love to hear about that. But this one has always fascinated me. And it's...
Anytime you're touching the blade, it's pretty cool.
What's that?
Anytime you're touching the blade, it's pretty cool. As in touching the blade this way.
Oh, yeah.
Or on
You
top.
get into
pulling
deep
too.
spots with it too.
What year did that particular scraper?
This one came out in 1929.
Okay. Could it have been maybe a cost issue, maybe?
That's part of what I was thinking, but it doesn't have that many less parts. But it's just an interesting...
Do you think on the hand scrapers here, didn't they make one without a handle so guys could get under toe kicks of cabinets who don't have?
Yeah, well, they made one that was basically just a wooden body with a blade on it.
It wasn't beveled and swing like a.
Yeah, it was just a lock piece.
Okay.
And they sold dirt cheap, but now they're really collectible. Because they were sold dirt cheap. It was a simple wooden handle, and they disappeared pretty quickly. And there's one with a blue handle that they only made a run of them, and they're really hard to find. And if you find one, they're like $6,000-$7,000. So yeah.
Two-tone scraper.
Steve wouldn't let me borrow that one. Burnishers. Stanley also made burnishers, but oddly enough, these came really late to the game. And the burnishers didn't come out until 1929 and 1936 for the oval one, which you would think Stanley making tools would have made burnishers earlier. But if you're making a card scraper, all you need is something harder than this, which could be the edge of a chisel. It could be a drill bit. It could be the edge of a safe file. You can turn a burr with just about anything, so why would someone need to make a burnisher when there's anything you have at hand? And eventually Stanley got to the point where they started making burnishers, which I don't know, I kind of find that little fact interesting. But they came with the smooth rod like you would think about as a knife steel. But then they also have this one, which is oval, comes to a point on either side. So if you guys want to come up afterwards and take a look at them. But this style is one that a lot of people absolutely swear by. I've never found out exactly why, but a lot of people love that. But this came out, was it 10 years later? 7 years later.
Wouldn't carvers use that to clean up some of their carvings, the murmur? Wouldn't they just come in and dress that out with that hand tool?
You could. I don't know. The last one I had here isn't Stanley, but Hamler makes these pieces that can go into a 6 or a 7. And this I absolutely love because it's something you can take the frog out, you can bolt one of these in, and this gives me the joy of a 112, but honestly at a fraction of the price. And, well, not a fraction, well, not a fraction, it's less price. But this is really fun because you get the full adjustability of it, you get all the functionality, and you can slap it into a plane you're already using. And it's absolutely genius. And this, I think, for me, in functionality in the shop, this is kind of like the pinnacle of where we're at right now in cabinet scrapers, and something I really enjoy using. So I wanted to bring that just to show as well. Make sure that I got everything in here.
That can also go into a 4.5, right?
Yes, 4.5. I think, if I remember correctly, for a while he made smaller ones that would fit into a 4 or 5. But I never got my hands on one of those. You did. Did he? Okay. Oh, the box scraper. That was the one I forgot. Which isn't a scraper. It's a plane because it has a shearing blade. But Stanley called it a scraper, which I've always found kind of interesting. Do you have, thank you. I have it sitting on my bench waiting for me to pack up and put in my bag. This tool I really, really enjoy. So imagine, well, let me back it up. You just ordered a package, came from Amazon, delivered to your door, you pull out what's inside, and you have this really nice, crisp box. Well, you can't just recycle it. You've got to ship something out. You've sold something, so you use that box to ship something out. People used to do the exact same thing with wooden crates. you get this really nice crate that came in, and rather than making your own or buying crates, all you did was you bought one of these, and you could then scrape off the markings on the outside, stamp on your markings, and ship the crate back out. And the nice thing about this is you could use it in a pushing fashion, or you can flip it around and use it in a pulling fashion. And so if you're working with a big box, you're not going to be able to get around that box to be in any one particular use or another. So because of this, if the grain's going one way or direction, you can just flip around and use the other way. And also, because it has a small sole, it will flex, so you're just dishing out an area rather than doing the whole board. Or if your crate is made of thinner wood, that thinner wood will want to flex when you're pushing on it, and so this will actually ride with the curvature of the wood. And Stanley called it a scraper, even though it's actually a plane. So that's an interesting one. Yeah, as to information, the Stanley catalogs, if you've never actually gone and read through these, do so, because the things that Stanley advertises, the things that they talk about, are often kind of fascinating in that they'll talk about some use of a tool and what it was for and what they intended it to be used for. And then you find out that today we're using it for something else. And a lot of times people will say that this tool was used for that when Stanley didn't actually advertise it for an item. So reading through those is a lot of fun if you ever get a chance. This one is actually a compendium of 1855 through 1898. And they're usually like 25, 30 bucks. And this is phenomenal to see how they've changed over time. Because when Stanley would first introduce a tool, they would advertise it and do a bunch of information about it. And then in later copies, it would just be line item, price, and that's it. So it's kind of fun to read through those. And then, of course, The Antique Tool and Collecting Guide by John Walters. This is the book. I've got two of them. One that is actually my reference, and one that sits on the shelf and I don't touch it because they tend to wear out.
That's the Bible.
Yes. He keeps saying he's going to do another edition, but we'll see.
We've heard that.
So that's what I have. Did anyone have any questions? Or?
Oh, this has been great. Thank you. Yeah.